Hi, Catherine Rhodes here. Let's talk about Chapter 7. How do you determine how much money to pay someone? Well, this chapter we're going to talk about 4 basic factors that determine pay rates, how to establish those pay rates in 4 basic steps, compare and contrast piecework and team or group incentive plans, and list and describe basic benefits that most employers offer. Well, how do you determine how much money you need to pay? Well, employee compensation is not only the hourly rate or the annual salary, but it also includes all of those benefits or indirect payments. So you can have wages, incentives, commissions, and bonuses, which are direct payments, and then you can have insurance, vacation, holiday pay, retirement, 401k match, matching Social Security, all of those things that are indirect. Well, there are issues and the pay factors that are involved, which is legal, union, if you have if the workforce is represented, policy, and then equity. So let's talk a little bit about the legal aspects of that. There's an act called Fair Labor Standards, and that contains minimum wage, the maximum hours that you can work, when overtime pay kicks in, equal pay, record keeping, and labor provisions. So what do you do? Well, I can tell you from my viewpoint, one of the things that happens is that you get asked information like, when do you have to pay overtime? Well, the law requires that you pay overtime over 40 hours worked in a week. Worked. Not including holiday pay. Although a lot of organizations will have stipulated that they count holiday pay in the overtime. You also don't have to pay overtime for working on holidays or for working on Sundays. That's a company policy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the only requirement that you have under the Fair Labor Standards Act is that you have to pay minimum wage, which right now I believe is $7.65 an hour, and you have to pay overtime on anything worked over 40. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex or gender, and you have to keep accurate records. Well, one of the big issues, and this is always becoming litigation issues, is who's exempt and who's not exempt. Well, if you're an exempt employee like I am, then you don't get paid overtime. You get paid a flat salary, and it doesn't matter how many hours you work. Well, the law stipulates that if you're exempt, you are either managing employees or you have more control over your workplace. Just because you have the title manager doesn't mean that you're automatically exempt. So we need to look at that and think about that. And that's where some organizations get into trouble, is by saying that employees are exempt, when really under the law they're not. The Equal Pay Act says that you can't pay a male more than a female or a female more than a male if they're doing about the same job. And then there's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which is where we get into unlawful practice of discrimination with respect to hiring, compensation, terms and conditions, or privileges of unemployment because of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And this is what typically people sue under. In fact, Walmart right now is being sued because they say that they were discriminatory against females who wanted to be managers. And these managers were earning more money because they got bigger bonuses. So there's this lawsuit, which a lot of women have joined in. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. There were a couple of lawsuits locally within the last couple of years over overtime pay, and people were asked to clock out during times that weren't busy, and they weren't paid, but they weren't allowed to leave. That's an issue under the law, not under the discrimination law, but under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And then there's some other compensation laws, such as age discrimination in employment, Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, or the Family and Medical Leave Act, such as FMLA. Yes, I know, HR is full of wonderful acronyms, but you need to understand what that's about. Well, what about unions? The National Labor Relations Act, or the NLRA of 1935, granted employees the right to organize, to bargain collectively, and to engage in concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining. Well, what does that really mean? Well, let's just say that means that, like in Oak Ridge, where the atomic trade workers bond together and then they have a contract that's signed that stipulates what the wages and the benefits are going to be, so that instead of one person having to go in and do a handshake deal, like when you're trying to negotiate for a raise, they have a union steward and others who help to negotiate those, and that's a binding contract. Well, one of the issues is looking at where and how people are paid. And you have to decide that as an organization, or the executives decide that. Are you going to pay the prevailing wage rate? Are you going to pay more so that you don't have employees who leave for higher wages? And then you also have to look at the area of the country that you live in. I once had a tool and die maker who came into the office and said that tool and die makers were making $22 an hour. And this was back in the late 1980s. And I said, well, really, where are they paying that? And he said, well, they're paying that in Detroit, Michigan. Well, the cost of living in Detroit, Michigan is a lot higher than it is in East Tennessee. And, you know, nowadays Detroit, Michigan is having difficulty having people get paid that much. But they're highly unionized, so those are negotiated labor rates. In the state of Tennessee at that time, in the East Tennessee area, tool and die makers were making about $14 to $16 an hour, and we were paying about $17 an hour at that time. But again, he wanted to make more money. Don't blame him for that, but I couldn't pay him $22 an hour because that just was not the prevailing wage. You also have to be concerned about internal and external equity. If you don't pay the prevailing wage in your area, then it's difficult to attract and retain qualified employees. I had that happen to me when I worked at Shop at Home, where we were paying just a little bit above minimum wage, at that time about $6.50 an hour. And we required employees to work a lot of weekends and night shifts. And so as soon as they could find a job making about the same amount of money, they'd leave. So I had a high turnover rate. So it was very difficult to find people. When we bumped the salary up, and I had to do an analysis of that to say that, you know, we were spending a lot of time hiring and training people. So I was able to convince them that if we increased the wage to about $7 an hour at that time, and this was back in the mid-1990s, then we'd be able to retain those individuals, and we were able to do that. And then we have internal equity, and I'm sure everybody that's watching this video has from time to time had an opportunity to find out what somebody else is making, and you think, well, I'm worth more money than that. Why are they getting paid more money? So you need to review that, and while merit increases can be great, let's turn the lights back on, they can also cause problems. And so you need to be able to justify why somebody's being paid more money, especially if there's a difference in age or sex or national origin or color or religion. So how do you determine how much you're going to pay? Well, you probably want to conduct a salary survey, and you want to find out what others are paying in the marketplace. And there's a lot of places that you can go on the web now. But it used to be that the Tennessee Valley Human Resource Association did a wage salary, and they still do this every year, and then the members were able to get that information and use that to determine what their own pay salaries and how they were going to determine what their pay rates were. You want to look at the worth of each job through job evaluation and compensable factors. How much education? What are the job safety factors? Because there are some jobs that are dangerous, so they get paid a premium for that. And there's a lot of various ways that you can do that, which are similar to the ways that we talked about in performance appraisal through ranking or job classification. As you can well imagine, somebody with a skill level labor is going to make more money than somebody that just needs a high school education. You can do it by point systems, and when I worked at Magna International, we used the Hay method, which was a point method that had to do with all sorts of knowledge, skills, and abilities that we would rate people on. Or you can group similar jobs into pay grades and then have a low-level range, a midpoint, and then a high-level range, so that it takes a look to see how people are being paid. I used that when I worked at TRW Koya. We had grade levels, and so every year we would take a look at that along with the HR director and our corporate structure to see how the pay grades were, and then we would have to fine-tune. One of the situations that we had, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that we were looking for engineers, mechanical engineers with 1 to 2 years of experience, and they could be new grads with co-op experience. But when I started to hire a new graduate, there were so few of them coming out of the college at the universities at that time, people were paying a premium for them. And I could actually hire somebody with 3 to 5 years experience at a lower rate and not have to worry about upsetting our internal equity. Here at the college, because individuals with master's degree in nursing, there are very few of them, and you have to have a master's in nursing to teach nursing classes. Well, they're being paid about $70,000 to $90,000 on the open market. So in order for us to attract and to retain faculty members, we had to look at what we were paying them. And some of our faculty members who teach in the nursing area are paid a little bit more than some of our gen ed people because of the fact that they can make more money on the open market. So you got to develop pay grades, and then you have to look at it. Well, what about managerial and professionals? Well, typically managerial and professionals are non-exempt, which means that, they're exempt from receiving overtime, which means that they don't receive any pay for that. So we usually look at where they are, but then we tend to pay on performance, and a lot of organizations and companies pay bonuses to their salaried employees. And executive compensation can be very difficult, and I know you've heard and you've read about CEOs and COOs making millions of dollars and receiving stock funds. Well, why do we pay them so much? Well, typically you have a base salary, then you have short-term incentives, long-term incentives, and then some executive benefits and perks, and that's stock options usually. So you need to look at that. The Japanese, on the other hand, they will not pay their executives more than 10 times what their lowest person makes. But what they do instead, and they don't give large bonuses, but they pay for golf club memberships, or they purchase a home that the individual lives in while they're working there. So there's all sorts of ways to build in perks that aren't always sometimes dollars. We, on the other hand, tend to look at the dollar signs much more than that. So what are some of the current trends in compensation? Well, you could have competency or skill-based pay. And my husband's company, Tate & Lyle North America, does that. They pay on skill-based. So as you gain skills, you get bumped up, but you have to show that those skills, that you've attained them, and you have to, there's usually a test that they have to take, or you have to satisfy someone who has that skill level that you can then perform that skill. There's broad banding, which is collapsing salary grades and ranges into smaller levels. So you got 3 to 5 levels instead of a complicated 22 or 26 levels. And that can work well as that can work very well because it's a little easier and a little cleaner. And then what about executive pay? Taking a look at that. That's something that, again, even Congress has looked at. Should executives be paid that much money? And some stockholders have looked at that and said, why are we paying this person a lot of money when they're losing money for us? So again, it's something that we need to look at. You can have incentive plans, individual incentive plans. And my grandmother, when she worked at the shirt factory, they had piecework. So the more pieces you sewed, the more money you made. And she said that women would run around and steal pieces from one another when they'd go to the bathroom or go to lunch so that they'd make more money. But again, money can be a very big motivator. Or you can have variable pay. And I've received, in the past, bonuses based upon not only what I did, but based upon how well the company did. So that ties to productivity. And the Lincoln or Scanlon plan, Lincoln Electric, is one of those that is very popular, and you hear a lot about that. So you want people to work effectively together. So what about salespeople? Salespeople typically get paid a commission based upon how many units they sell. Like car salesmen, they get paid a percentage of how much the car, how much you buy the car for. So it's their advantage to sell it as high as can be. And sometimes that can be a 30% mix or a 100% mix for a car salesman. You can do employee recognition or training programs or travel. There's all sorts of incentives that you can give that are recognized for awards. You can do merit pay, which is salary increases awarded based upon individual performance, or profit sharing, and I talked about profit sharing that I had participated in the past. You can have an employee stock ownership plan where people receive shares of stock, and when I worked for a division of Magna International, part of our retirement fund was based upon stocks. You can have gain sharing plans, which is sharing financial results. We talked a little bit about Scanlon plans, which is cooperative, teamwork building, and then they share based upon how well the whole organization does, not just an individual. But what about benefits? Here at Rome State Community College, we have a lot of different benefits, including a retirement plan, a defined benefit retirement plan. A defined benefit means that at the end of so many years, you'll receive this amount of money for the rest of your life when you retire, as opposed to a defined contribution plan where so much money is put into a 401k or some other type of financial planning retirement fund, and you're not really sure how much you're going to get because you're not really sure how it's going to grow. So there's all sorts of benefits out there, and that's anything that's indirect monetary, time off with pay, health insurance, which is huge, child care benefits, vacation, annual leave, sick leave, all those sort of things that can be paid for time not worked. And then you can have severance pay, which is a one-time separation payment in the event that you lose your job. Some companies do this. Just recently it was announced that a big furniture company, Berkline, in Morristown was going out, and I'm sure that they will give some sort of severance to those individuals who have been with the company for a long period of time. So you may receive 2 weeks of wages for every year that you'd worked with the company, and then receive that in a lump sum. And WARN, which is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Act of 1989, requires that employees give 60 days written notice of plant closures. That way employees can take measures and they know what's going to happen, although sometimes there are exceptions to that. But that does give employees an opportunity to start looking at what their options are. There's also workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is paid to employees when they're hurt on the job so that they have an income stream. There's the Pregnancy Discrimination Act that was enacted back in the 70s, which required employers to treat women affected by pregnancy, childbirth, or other related medical conditions the same as an employee not able to work. It used to be that sometimes companies would have disability benefits, but they didn't cover maternity, so that put women at a disadvantage, which was not a good thing. There's the COBRA law, Comprehensive Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, which was enacted back in 1983, I believe it was. I had just started working and had to deal with this, which gave most employers, they had to make available to terminated employees continued health benefits for 18 months. The kicker is that you typically have to pay 100% of that, and that can be very difficult. Well, health insurance is changing as we talk because health care is so expensive. And here at the college, we had a great plan, and we still have a great plan, but now we're having to pay more for that plan. State employees pay approximately 20% of the total. And right now, for family coverage health insurance, it's about $1,000 a month. And we pay over $200 a month for family coverage. That sounds like a lot of money, but the benefits outweigh that, especially if you get hit with a $100,000, $200,000 hospital bill if you get really sick. So with health care insurance, you've got to have cost control. And one of the things that's happening right now with the state of Tennessee is that we have some good health things that are going on, and they're trying to get us to be healthier and having to go for health screenings and looking at how do we get new people to exercise and to take their medication properly. So there's a lot of wellness programs that are going into place. And then there are retirement plans. What are the retirement benefits? You have Social Security, and some of us aren't really sure that it's going to be around. I'm hopeful, so y'all keep working so that I can have Social Security. There are death benefits that are paid under Social Security, and then there are disability payments in the event that you're disabled and aren't able to work. We talked a little bit about the pension plans. I have a defined benefit pension plan, which is a retirement plan where I know exactly how much money I'm going to get depending upon how many years I work for the state. Then there's a defined contribution plan, and I also participate in that, where the state gives $50 a month to put into a 401k. Not sure how much that's going to give back to me because, again, it grows, it's invested in stocks. And then there are other things like Employee Assistance Programs, or EAP, which is a prepaid counseling and advisory service for mental health counseling or even legal or financial services. You can have EAPs. And they help employees to get through bad spots, and they're totally confidential, and that information is not shared with the organization who attended, but just the fact that so many people took advantage of that program. And then there are flexible benefit plans where you can pick and choose based upon what your need is. As you can imagine, there are some employees here who are not married and have no children. They don't need health insurance for a family. They just need health insurance for themselves. So the cost, again, that's one of the reasons we have to pick up and pay so much. And then There are some companies that decide to use short-term leasing employees or temporary agencies, because that way they don't have to pay the benefits and they just pay an hourly rate, and the company that is actually their employer pays benefits, and usually they have minimal benefits. Pay and benefits are an important reason why we all go to work, and having a good structure for pay and for benefits is important. The best thing that you can do is you can look at and figure out what is being paid locally, what are the prevailing wage rates, how much do you want to pay, and what kind of turnover are you going to have, and how difficult is it going to be to attract employees based upon your current pay policy as well as your benefits. Hope you've enjoyed this lecturette. It's a little long. It's about 26 minutes.